So now we're going to shift gears and talk to our industry partners. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and share with you a little bit more about their backgrounds and their work. You want to start, Josh?
Sure. I'm Joshua Knox. I started at Google just under 10 years ago, right out of grad school at Cal Poly, and had this program existed back then, it probably would have been the go-to for my master's because it was really my interest even back then. I've spent the last 10 years working across our ad systems and analytics at Google, and I'm excited to join you guys today and talk a little bit more about this program at Cal Poly.
Great, thanks. Rich?
Good morning, and congratulations, Scott and Sanjeev. This is a very, very exciting time for Cal Poly, and I'm happy to be part of this. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rich Clayton. I'm VP of Business Analytics for Oracle. Joined about 8.5 years ago when Oracle acquired an analytics company called Hyperion Solutions, which predominantly served CFOs and financial management leaders. Spent the last 25 years in my career in the analytics field and various different roles. Today it's predominantly a marketing role where I lead our marketing strategy for all the analytic products at Oracle. But before that, started out in public accounting and corporate finance and consulting and different roles, and sort of learned the hard way about the opportunity of analytics. But it's been a field that's really changed in the last few years, and excited to talk with you a little bit today.
Well, Josh and Rich, thanks so much for spending time with us. We have a couple individuals here who are deep into the field here. I'm going to start with the first question and ask Rich to take the lead on that. What unique business challenges can an MS in business analytics help solve?
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott, and I think really there are many different challenges across industries and functions. You know, in agriculture, for example, we're trying to increase yield to feed the world, and data and analysis provide a pretty important foundation for what's called precision farming, where now farmers are using data from tractors, using geothermal data from satellites to try to predict outcomes in the field and try to minimize waste. In healthcare, you mentioned that analytics is not just working on curing cancer, but also about using genome data for personalized medicine. Manufacturing, maybe an old school industry, but they're trying to do preventative maintenance on equipment, because every hour that equipment isn't operational, it's not generating revenues, and predicting that mean time to failure is important for their success. So just to give you a simple example, I work with a large door and window manufacturer in the Midwest, and they're trying to create smart products. And smart products mean that data from the product that's manufactured can be actually used as a revenue generating source. Sometimes it's called the Internet of Things, or IoT, but what are they going to do with the data? So they're going to sell that information to real estate property managers, to security companies and police departments. So when bad people walk through your door or window, that can be detected sooner than later. So there's a tremendous number of opportunities. More traditional finance functions are even changing pretty rapidly. It's not just about building budgets anymore. It's about predicting cash flow. And so if you go into finance and you don't have an understanding about data science and predictive analytics, as Sanjeev talked about a little bit, I think you'll be kind of missed and left behind. And so I think there's many different opportunities and challenges, but those are just a couple of examples.
Those are great examples. I hear from my friends in accounting too that the whole field of auditing is likely to be heavily impacted as well. And Josh, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think Rich gave some really good broad examples that illustrate clearly that it's not limited to a few specific functions or a few specific industries. It's really across the board. So in the same way that someone in the past maybe didn't need to have typing skills, but now in the 21st century and everything being computing based, you got to know how to use a keyboard. In the future, I think data is going to be one of those critical tools that everyone needs to understand. So the unique challenge is really to be able to build an organization that is data driven. I've worked with a lot of different companies on the Google Analytics side of things that, you talk to them, they're known for being very data driven and data forward, and really still, I would say that truly leveraging for the value of the data is in its infancy, also across the board. So with all of this data is a real democratization of decision making. Many people from the top to the bottom in an organization have access to this data, and if you're able to come in, make a prescient analysis, suggest really valuable actions, I think that you can show your value to an organization, and there's a tremendous opportunity there. So this great equalizer helps us make better decisions, more civil discourse, so that we can be more based on facts and not just opinions. And that skill is a really important part of business when you build a judgment. But I think it also needs to be balanced with some facts. So not just the highest paid person's opinion. So
great insights. So we'll move on to our second question. And Josh, I'll ask you to take the lead on this. What do companies like Google and Oracle look for in a strong business analytics applicant?
I think it was something that you and Sanjeev touched on earlier, and I was looking earlier just to get a sense for the number of jobs that Google currently has listed with analyst or analysis in the title, and there are more than 350. And in having worked with people in different functions at work and external partners, I think a key piece is the ability to weave a story with these meaningful insights from data. So that focus that was being described, not just on the technical but also on the business, is really a critical piece. So I think a lot of times what we look for when we're hiring people into these types of roles is that ability to build a story with the data, but also to be action-oriented. It's not just about reporting. It's great to pat yourself on the back when you launch something and you see all these great performance metrics coming through, but the reporting is not the point. Getting things set up and getting reporting built is a very small part of the overall equation. So materially impacting the bottom line with actions based on this data is really the key, and people with experience doing that seems to be still a pretty rare skill set.
And Rich?
Yeah, so in my area, we look for folks similar to what Josh said, but who are curious. Candidates that want to challenge the biases and look beyond just testing their hypothesis, but really curious about discovering patterns that perhaps people didn't know, but not just for sort of intellectual curiosity, but to Josh's point, putting it into action. So I think it's critical, and you all have I think put a curriculum together that embraces this idea, but we look for people that don't just have strong technical skills in analyzing information, but can also put that in context to what's trying to be decided or acted on right now. So that storytelling piece that Josh mentioned, I think, especially in large organizations, is pretty essential. And the last point I just add is that data is never clean, right? It's always have complexities, and it's never as simple as it looks. And so we look for folks that have sort of a design orientation for improving analytic process, because you can't wait for perfect data. You've got to be creative. You've got to be sort of scrappy, if you will, in solving the analytical challenges and cleaning the data at the same time. So it's not just a sequential but a networked approach.
So what I'm hearing is that the demands are pretty sophisticated, and certainly you can see why a master's degree, which allows a depth of study, is needed to really fulfill what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
So we'll move on to our third question now. what types of career growth can an analytics leader expect? And Josh, why don't we start with you for this question?
Sure. I thought this was a good one because even myself, I've noticed some very interesting trends in the business world and industry. A friend who was a product manager who I had worked with on Google Analytics is now the chief data officer for Dow Jones. And I hadn't really heard the title chief data officer previously. And poking around a little bit, it still seems to be a somewhat uncommon role, but something that I really would bet on becoming more prevalent in industry in the future. So chief information officer, chief data officer. So in terms of career growth, I mean, that's basically all the way to the top to the executive suite. And over time, you see, the executive officers in the major corporations of the world, you see shifting patterns in terms of their backgrounds. Maybe engineering was a common, background for people who then make it to the executive suite for certain industries, and then, maybe law for some point of time was one of those, or accounting, skills like that. I think data is and analysis is really going to be one of those skill sets and backgrounds where you start to see people moving into the executive suite who are conversant and capable and comfortable in that world. So, people who actually understand the data, I think, have a real advantage, and especially, whether you're starting from the top, the middle, the bottom, being able to dive into the data really allows you to understand the business in a very critical way. And oftentimes you're one of few who really has that understanding, which really opens up opportunities. So, countless sources point to the tremendous growth of jobs requiring these skills, but this really gets to not just getting in the door and getting a job, but what is the future? And I think that's a really big, important part of feeling fulfilled in your career, and your career being such an important part of your life, and how much time you spend every day at work. I think it's a pretty critical piece, and I really think that not only is it an interesting job, but it's an interesting job with a great future potential.
It's a very motivational response. Rich?
I think a couple things that come to mind when we ponder this question. It's, first of all, I think that many times the perception is that, well, I have to aspire to be a data scientist in this field, and clearly I think, as you've mentioned, that's not really the case. While there are plenty of roles and jobs for actuaries and data scientists, I think the broader business market is the one that's in such great need. So much so that companies are now creating new executive roles called chief data officers, which in my assessment is not a code word for IT or a technology person, but it's a new role that they're creating to drive innovation and create data capital inside their companies by using it, as I described, in the window and door manufacturer. So I think folks that pursue an advanced degree in analytics have lots of different opportunities. My view is that specialization is really essential, and that analytics is one that will open many, many doors for folks that have an appreciation. So, if you start in marketing, you might go into a marketing operations role, lead a marketing operations team. In my organization and most organizations, that's essentially the chief of staff for the chief marketing officer. In finance, it could be a career path that includes running the head of planning and analysis, or VP of planning and analysis in organizations. But I really do think that analytics is the new business language, and it does provide lots of different career paths if you have an appreciation for it.
So tremendous opportunities. Well, we have one last question for Josh and Rich. How does the Cal Poly MS in Business Analytics program stand out from other programs? And Rich, you want to take the lead on this one?
Absolutely. Well, Scott, as you know, I'm very excited to work with you, the faculty and administration. I think what you're doing is very, very unique. Analytics is a field I've dedicated my life to, professional life to, and really honored to work with Cal Poly on this. There's a few things that kind of stand out for me. First is your interdisciplinary approach. I think connecting the dots across these academic fields is very important and very unique in terms of your strategy. I think a lot of programs out there today are really one-dimensional, and I think Cal Poly is very unique. The second thing is that your approach in learn by doing, I think, is distinctive because data is a doing thing. It changes quickly. To Sanjeev's point, you know, the questions are new, and your approach in connecting students with real data sets and real businesses and real challenges is something I think is going to be set your students apart when they come out of the program. You know, I think the fact that you have this blended curriculum is important. I also think that the connection to your econometrics background is special and an important part of the strategy. So I think the students that come from your program will have many opportunities, and look forward to working with you on the future on this.
Great, thank you, Rich. And Josh, anything to add?
Yeah, I think you know, Cal Poly has a lot of advantages, especially with regards to this MS and business analytics. I think, as Sanjeev and Rich alluded to, a lot of the programs in this area. First of all, I think it's a fairly rare thing to have such a degree. But a lot of the programs that I've seen tend to chase people away because they're very heavily focused on the computational side of things. And as was alluded to, it's really critical to understand the practical implications of the data and the actions that you're suggesting based on that data. So there really needs to be an intuition for the communications and the business side and the interpersonal and some of those soft skills, which is really reflected in the curriculum and it being centered in the business school. So, you know, how do you get the right people on board? What are the motivators for those groups of people who are at play with these, you know, actions that you're taking based on data? If you come in and say, you know, well, you've been doing everything wrong historically, and everything that you should do is completely counter to anything you've done before, and we're going to have to, you know, slash and burn, that may not be a suggestion that is actionable, not because the data doesn't show it to be true, but because it's approached in somewhat of an impractical way. So, you know, I think that, as well as the industry connections that we've seen, you know, it's been very illuminating to participate with the advisory board and give suggestions about, you know, common pitfalls when people are educating people who enter this field, some of the oversights, some of the weaknesses in the candidate pool when we go out there and try and hire for these 350 plus jobs that are open at Google. So, you know, I think it's that mix of business and technical with the focus on group work, you know, and really the bread and butter of Cal Poly, the learn by doing approach that sets it apart.